I mean, there's a bazillion up-to-date and guidelines about what the therapy is. The problem isn't the therapy. The gap clearly is diagnosis.
Welcome to All Things Cardio-Oncology. My name is Steve Caselli. I'm the Executive Director of ICOS. And on our podcast this year, we are introducing a new series that we're calling Heart to Heart. In this series, we'll be speaking with patients and the healthcare providers who treat them. Our hope is that you'll be encouraged and empowered by their stories, whether you are a survivor, a healthcare provider, or a supportive family member or friend. So thanks for joining us on this episode of Heart to Heart. Well, in this series that we have titled Heart to Heart, we're speaking with patients and the physicians who treat them so that we might gain a deeper appreciation for what it looks like, particularly from the patient perspective, to move through the experience of life-threatening disease and treatment with the hope that together as a community, we can improve the care that we provide for patients. So I welcome my co-host, Dan Lier, and he and I have the privilege today to speak with Dan Lier, who has become a true advocate for patients facing the very challenging diagnosis of amyloidosis. Dan Lier became a #1 sales performer for Tony Robbins, and then he built his own keynote speaking and success training business while currently undergoing chemotherapy treatment for cardiac amyloidosis. And as you'll see, he is consistent with his calling of being a real inspiration. So welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here today.
And we're also joined by Dr. Morrie Gertz, who is a hematologist from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where Dan's being treated. He was the chair of the Division of Hematology in the Department of Internal Medicine at Mayo Clinic, and really a world expert in amyloidosis, and he's one of the treating physicians for Dan. So welcome, Dr. Gertz.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Amyloidosis is a disease which claims the lives of about 40% of those who are diagnosed within the first year. Well, on May 12th, 2017, Dan Lier was diagnosed with cardiac amyloidosis, and here we are 8 years later speaking with him today. And so really thrilled to have this conversation, given the really miraculous success of Dan's treatment. And equally important is how he's really turned this challenging disease into another opportunity to do what he's done throughout his life, and that is to inspire and motivate others who face their own life challenges. So, Dan, maybe you could begin just describing for us a little bit about your life leading up to and including your diagnosis. We know that one of the central challenges with this disease is getting to a clear diagnosis. So tell us a little bit about your experience leading up to that.
Yeah, thanks. So prior to diagnosis, I'm just going to take you back a little farther than normal. Just in college, I was a college basketball player on a very, very successful college basketball team. And I only bring that up because I believe that one of the reasons that I'm succeeding right now is because of my mindset and some of the things I learned during that process. After college, I went on to work a variety of jobs, but my third job in the marketplace was I worked for a gentleman by the name of Tony Robbins. He's a big motivational speaker, success coach, and I worked with him for 6 years. I was his right-hand man, and I was promoting his seminars, events, doing talks. And of course, that environment was also an environment that was all about mindset, mental toughness, getting things done, working through obstacles, which was the same parallel background that I had in sports. So I only tell you that just because as time went on, I moved out to Las Vegas, started my keynote business. I'm an author of 4 books. I was the #1 speaker in Las Vegas. And then I was started to just feel really funky. I was very active. I had kept in shape ever since college, one of those guys that never missed a day and took the stairs instead of the elevator and watched what I ate and all those kind of things. And just wasn't feeling good. And it was really odd because it was just in the time that I was just starting to date this new woman, because I remember the process, and all of a sudden I just wasn't feeling well. And so I started going to specialists in Las Vegas. And the short story is that I went to 3 different cardiologists, multiple different specialists. And the specialist said I had everything from GERD to emphysema. They had me on puffers. They had me on all types of things. All 3 cardiologists basically said the same thing. You have congestive heart failure, and you have what's called athlete's heart, because my heart was thicker at the bottom. None of them came up with amyloidosis. One of them came up with the word amyloidosis, but he didn't know anything about it. But at least he was very, very proactive. And he's like, look, there's something called amyloidosis. I'm not qualified to treat it, but there's something going on with you. So that's when I was like, okay, geez, I'm in this place. And up to that point too, from a rare disease perspective, there's so much uncertainty about what's going on, because here's a healthy guy like myself. Pretty soon, my things are just different. And I went from, playing basketball to not playing basketball, then to doing spin class, to not be able to do spin class, to go to yoga, to not be able to do that because I'm passing out doing downward dogs. And yet nobody has answers for me. And so it's one of those things where you're beside yourself, and you're wondering what's going to go on. You're wondering if you're going to live. You're wondering if what's going on with you. And for me, my heart was just always racing. And I got an ablation in 2013, thinking that was going to be the answer, but it wasn't. And so there were many nights prior to my diagnosis in 2017 that I had my heart racing all over the place, but I didn't know what was wrong, and no one could tell me. And so I was afraid, and I was afraid to go to sleep at night. So there were many nights during those years that I chose not to go to sleep because I was afraid I wasn't going to wake up. And so I tell you that because one of those nights, after my experience with all the cardiologists in Vegas for 2 years, all 3 of these cardiologists says you've got congestive heart failure, but they couldn't tell me why. And I had created an appointment at Mayo for 2 weeks in advance. And so it was one of those nights where I couldn't sleep. And now, I was not that I couldn't sleep. It was that I was afraid to go to sleep because my heart was going nuts. And I was like, okay, this is it. If I go to the emergency room in Vegas, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to sit in the hallway for 4 hours. They're going to stick me in the hall, and nothing's going to happen. And so I decided to book a flight. I drove to the Vegas airport, booked a flight to Minneapolis, flew in on a red eye, rented a car, and drove to the Mayo Clinic. And that's when, actually, I went to the emergency room, and they thought I was crazy. But my thought process is, well, if I go there, then they can actually find something out, and I'll be there, and they can do something. Well, of course, they thought I was nuts. They're like, dude, you came to Mayo in Minnesota for emergency room. And so I said, look, I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the night. And the guy says, well, I've got good news and bad news. He goes, the good news, you're not going to die tonight. The other news is there is something going on with you, but you've got an appointment in how long? And I was like, about 10 days. And he goes, well, keep your appointment, come back. So anyway, fast forward. Then I came back, and that's when I met Dr. Gertz at the Mayo Clinic. And it was so amazing because, I walked in there, and I didn't know Dr. Gertz from anybody, and I didn't know what amyloidosis was. And I walked in there, and he looked at me, and he says, I think I know what you have, but I have to clinically prove it. So give me a few days. Little did I know, I had, some shades of purpura around my eyes, and he obviously knew what that was, but none of the other cardiologists did back in Vegas, because I had that in my eyes all the time. So that was my introduction to, that was, the short story of my long process of getting diagnosed. And that was my first encounter when I went to the Mayo Clinic and met Dr. Gertz. And then we started treatment, and we went on from there. I guess I'll probably turn it over to you guys from here, because I think Dr. Gertz can probably share some thoughts.
Yeah. So, Morrie, this is the other Dan. So I'll refer to myself as the other Dan today, just for clarity's sake. But uh, what is your recollection of this whole story? Because, this is, I mean, I don't know what it's like at the Mayo Clinic necessarily. I mean, I've been at different institutions, but I'm sure I've never been to the Mayo Clinic before, certainly as a patient or a provider. And, what do you take from this story? You have somebody who lives in Vegas who gets on a plane and shows up in the emergency room in Rochester. And then, this is the journey that they took to get there. How did that strike you?
Well, regrettably, Mr. Lier's story is actually quite common, and I hear it monthly. Um, Cardiac amyloidosis is a disorder because of its rarity and the fact that it mimics a lot of other more common disorders, is subject to what we refer to in medical education as confirmation bias. And so patients go get an echo. Echo shows thick walls. You get thick walls, they automatically assume it's hypertrophy, not infiltration. And so you get hypertensive cardiomyopathy, valvular cardiomyopathy, athletes cardiomyopathy. Um, um, it just gets written off because the thickening is most commonly due to hypertrophy and things like the eyelid purpura, which Mr. Lier actually had photos on his phone to show me. I saw that. I said, "Oh my, you have pictures?" He said, "Oh yeah, I've got pictures to show you." And he showed me, and it was pretty, to me, typical eyelid purpura, but that requires, of course, a meticulous physical exam because when patients have their eyes open, you don't see the eyelid purpura because their eyes are open. And so it is relatively quick, actually, once that happened. But unfortunately, patients can meander around. I'd say the median's a year, median number of physicians 3 years. And if the cardiac amyloid is quite advanced, patients will succumb to the disease before they come to a diagnosis. And it's primarily a systems issue. I think that the teaching point for most cardiologists is when you see someone with heart failure and preserved ejection fraction or a thick heart wall, you need to do an immunoglobulin free light chain assay and a technetium pyrophosphate scan. That's just part of this systematized workup that you need to do. 30 years ago, oh, not such a big deal. We didn't have very effective therapy. You miss it. It's unfortunate. But now, with the menu of effective therapies we have, it's really kind of important not to miss it because it's reversible.
Yeah, I think I would add one other piece. I mean, obviously, you are a absolute world's expert on this whole situation, and being at the Mayo Clinic, you've led many of the clinical trials or whatever that have improved our treatment. But in this situation specifically, uh, one of the problems or one of the concepts that as a cardiologist I struggle with most is relaying to my cardiology or hematology colleagues how important it is to get on it, to not wait months and months to try to figure this out. Because especially if it ends up being AL amyloidosis, you really need to think about it as a cardiac emergency. Because the longer you wait, the worse it gets, the more difficult it is to treat. And we did a presentation a year or so ago, and some of our colleagues from Italy were describing a situation where they uh, got a call from a referring doctor to a main center there in Italy, and they agreed, yes, this is amyloidosis. We need to get going, and they made an appointment for like 3 weeks from then for the patient to be seen in this centralized place. and the patient died before they got there. And this is the sense of urgency, especially for the initial diagnostic piece, really needs to be emphasized. And I know, Morrie, I know you've talked about these issues before, but what is your perspective on that?
Well, again, I think that education can only go so far in that you need to systematize these things. And I think the educational message, again, is with undiagnosed heart failure, someone who doesn't have obvious hypertensive valvular ischemic disease, then you need to start screening for the treatable things. And I see cardiologists all the time checking ferritin because they're well aware that hemochromatosis is an important cause of infiltrative cardiomyopathy, but it's just not on their radar screen about light chain and TTR amyloidosis. And so again, you just have to incorporate it into the workup. So when patients are referred to a cardiologist for undiagnosed heart failure, it's very common for them to pre-schedule an echocardiogram, an EKG, chest x-ray, maybe even cardiac magnetic resonance imaging. And what I try to stress when I talk to cardiologists is just include a blood light chain test because it will blow this wide open if it is abnormal, and it's always abnormal in AL amyloidosis. So you can't remember rare diseases. There are too many of them. You have to systematize it. And I think that the way to do that is to have, for people who have order sets in the cardiology office or an electronic medical record that gets orders done before a patient is seen, to just simply include the serum-free light chain assay, which from a expense standpoint is much less expensive than almost all cardiac diagnostics.
So let's move on to another very important topic, just as it relates to this space, So Dan, could you explain how, once you had the diagnosis and then you initiated treatment, how do you deal with, say, for example, in this case, the distance between Vegas and Rochester, and your primary treating physician is many states away? How does all this happen, or what was your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, a great question, and it was obviously all new to me. So, as I got diagnosed by Dr. Gertz, what happened in my situation was he also introduced there was a drug trial that was available, and because I was able to get enrolled in the drug trial actually was they were paying to for my expenses to get back and forth for however long the drug trial lasted. And so it lasted for, I don't know, quite some time, but I was able to see Dr. Gertz for, get myself squared away and get myself situated and established with him. So we created some consistency there. And thank goodness that transpired, because, I think it would have been very difficult if not. As we moved forward, and I was able, after probably a year or two, I don't remember exactly. Obviously, I wasn't able to go up there with that much frequency, but then I was able to. I lived in Vegas, so I was able to transfer down to the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona. So, and to my, I don't know, I guess fortunate for me that I was actually the oncologist that I had at the time, or the hematologist. He was actually one of Dr. Gertz's medical students, or just somebody that worked under Dr. Gertz at Mayo. His name was Dr. Jeremy Larson, and he did a great job. And so I was lucky to be with him, and he was a really good guy. And I was with him for a few years in Phoenix. So that was, my situation. And again, there's so much uncertainty because, when I got diagnosed, of course, I never heard about amyloidosis before, didn't know what it was. But for me, I was excited to get diagnosed because prior to that, it would be, I mean, like in a different world. Imagine you were a salesperson, but you never had a sales goal. And every month you went in and you had no idea what your goal was, and you didn't know if you were going to get fired or not because you couldn't hit your goal. And that's how,
or you weren't even sure what you were selling.
that's my, yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So
So
I didn't know what I had. I didn't know what I was up against. I didn't know
yeah.
anything. So when I finally got diagnosed, it was just a kind of a surreal thing. We were at the Mayo Clinic and we went down. I was with my wife at the time, and we went down to the bar, and I had a beer to celebrate. And it was literally celebrating the fact that I got diagnosed, and I was ready to kick some ass because in the past I was like in the dark, and so, you're just handcuffed and so much uncertainty. So that's anyway, that's how it transpired with me.
So yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting story, and certainly you're very blessed that it all worked out that way. But also, whatever happened in your head that said, I'm going to take a flight and just go to the emergency room at Mayo Clinic, for whatever reason, that was the right move at the right time. So, good on you on that. But so Morrie, right in line with what you're saying, that we need to systematize things. So how would you say, how do we systematize, this whole treatment paradigm? Because if we have this great example where he gets in a clinical trial and then he's got his travel paid for and, then ultimately makes a connection more local, at least in somewhat local in Phoenix. But, what about all those other patients, that didn't happen to get into that system? How do we improve the system so that patients get their treatment
Well,
when
there's a warning for patients. There are a lot of patients who refuse to get a second opinion. The answer is I'm very, very comfortable with the care that I'm receiving, even though it's not certain what's going on. And that is an ongoing problem. Um, Mr. Lier certainly would be in a much better position to reflect on why it's important that patients take ownership to some degree. He simply wasn't satisfied and said, I'm not going to stand for it. I'm going to say that he's a bit unique, and that there are many patients who simply go along with their diuretic therapy or their beta blocker or their ablation or their cardioversion or their pacemaker and don't seek out further insight. And there's not much to be done about it. I mean, patients have to own a little bit, if they're not getting better or they're not satisfied. I would say that 90% of the consults I do are not like Mr. Lier. Patients come for a second opinion, and what they get is your doctors at home are doing a great job. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but all the right things are being done, and standard of care is being done. You alluded to the treatment. Quite bluntly, the problem isn't the therapy. The gap clearly is diagnosis. It's getting to a prompt diagnosis. Most practicing hematologists and cardiologists know what the right therapy is. It's disease recognition that's the problem. We're always happy to offer clinical trials. Obviously, if you want to move the needle and improve the outcome for future generations of patients, it's not happening unless you participate in medical research. But medical research has its biases and issues. People get very, very nervous when you talk to them about participating in medical research in terms of, particularly if, like in Mr. Lear's case, there's the potential for a placebo on top of traditional therapy, and there's some misgivings. A lot of times, patients meet me for the first time. There's been no bond of trust that's been established. And there I am talking about medical research. And it's like, I've known you for 45 minutes. and all of a sudden you're putting me into research, and am I your guinea pig? And so there's a lot of these preconceived biases that don't reflect the fact that participation in a clinical trial for most patients is the absolute best that they could do, because these are trials developed by global thought leaders in the field who are trying to move the needle to improve things. And that's an ongoing barrier. And for a lot of patients with rare diseases, distance is a barrier. That's why we've convinced sponsors that if you want people to participate, the most common answer is I'd love to, but I live too far away. And so the answer is we're going to provide complimentary transportation. And for Mr. Lier, that would include a chaperone as well. We'll pay for 2 people to come, and lodging and meals, because we don't want financial barriers to be a disincentive to developing the next breakthrough in the management of your disease.
Yeah, those are super important points. I will say that, at ICOS, we're trying to develop strategies for overcoming some of these barriers, and we've recently uh, initiated a program where we're trying to build out clinical practice in outside of major institutions, where the leadership or the guidance of the care that's being provided is coming from those major institutions, but it's being delivered out in maybe a smaller community or even a rural area. So the patient doesn't have to transfer from their rural position to a major center, but there's direct communication between the providers. And so we're actually actively working on that whole process, and hope that in the next 1 to 2 years we really can establish that as a network building process. And so I think that these issues, like you said, I think participation in medical research is super important, but obviously that's a voluntary thing. And some people aren't going to just have the space in their head to go that route. But we still want to find any way or all the ways that we can reduce some of these major barriers that you've already pointed out. And so we hope that we can continue to do that. And Dan, with your somebody to talk to process, weekly webinar, website, and all that. I mean, it's a super impressive thing that you're doing, and we definitely want to keep close collaboration with that. But also, and Dr. Gertz, we always look to your leadership for how we can improve our care. But now we're also really trying to build out the process of care, like you said, try to change our processes so that these actual excellent treatments are delivered. And that's a real challenge, especially when you start talking about the expense and the availability of those medications. So I don't know what you think about those comments.
I agree with everything that you said. People live in rural communities, and participation in clinical trials isn't going to be really a practicable option. Um, I think you summarized it nicely.
So Dan, how can we help your weekly webinars and your website and whatever other efforts you're into? How can we help promote those or get the word out further than you've already done, actually?
Yeah, thank you. So our platform is called Somebody to Talk to. It's a patient education and empowerment program, and it happens over a Zoom. And so it happens every week. It's a live Zoom process or a session, 6 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Pacific. And people can find out about it by going to the website somebodytotalkto.com. And then at the top, you'll see an opportunity to, let's see here. says session calendar, and then you press on amyloidosis, and then it gives the sessions, and you can register. So somebodytotalkto.com, session calendar, and then amyloidosis, and you can sign up there. So we're always looking for doctors, all kind of any experts, hematologists, oncologists, people in the know that want to share about amyloidosis. And of course, any patients or advocates or caregivers, we invite them on. There's no charge for the event, and it happens every week. So love any help we can get on that. Thanks for asking.
And Dan, how would you close us out with comments to other patients who are facing similar challenges? Any takeaway messages for that community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really important, what Dr. Gertz said. It's like, if you feel good about the treatment that you're getting, that's great. But if you don't, and we all have that feeling inside of our gut, that feeling of like something's not right. And if you have that feeling, then it's upon you as the patient to dig a little deeper. And that's not what we all like to do. But it's important because like it's life or death. And literally, they were going to let me die. They were literally going to let me die. And I'll tell you how sad it was. I'll tell you this last story. I'm in Vegas, and the Las Vegas Golden Knights have a very good hockey team. And I was in one of my friends. He's really a hot shot in town, and he's got one of these luxury boxes. And I was up in his box for a game. And I walked out to the restroom to use the restroom, and they've got the secure restrooms up there, and these suite areas. And I walked in there, and who was at the urinal next to me was one of the cardiologists that worked on me. Previous, he was like the first guy, and anyway, he was clueless. He was absolutely clueless. And I walked in, and I pulled up next to him at the urinal, and I'm like, "Hey, doc." And he goes, "Oh, wow. Hey, good to see you." And I'm like, "Hey, by the way, just want to let you know I got diagnosed with amyloidosis." This guy said nothing. He literally said nothing. He zipped up his pants and he walked out the door. And it hurt me. It actually hurt.
Of course it hurt you. Yeah.
My stomach dropped because it's like he's seeing other people. I mean, I was lucky that I made it. But he's seeing other people that look just like me, meaning they're thin, they're tall, they don't look like they have congestive heart failure, and he's letting them walk out and letting them die. So I think that what Dr. Gertz said is right on the mark. You've got to be your own advocate. You've got to fight for yourself, and then just when you get diagnosed, then to me it's all about you've got to focus on the healing journey rather than focus on dying. You need to focus on living and focus on getting better. And I think that's the key, is that many people get caught in this pattern where, of course, they've got this rare disease. And when you start reading the internet, it's not very promising. So it's really good to, really manage your mindset, be around people who are positive if you're not. And that's one of the reasons our program is good, somebody to talk to, because it gives people a place to go. To get encouragement, to get empowerment, and can get connection. And research shows that when people are connected and they feel supported and they feel like, they're not isolated, they actually respond better to treatment. They have a better quality of life, and they extend their life as well. So all those things work hand in hand. So that's my message.
That's a fantastic note to end on. That's so inspiring. We really do appreciate everything you're doing, and we'll put links in the show notes to both somebody to talk to and your YouTube channel, which hasn't been mentioned, but those videos, Dan has sort of chronicled his journey, and it's super inspiring. So helpful. And we really appreciate your positive outlook and your willingness to take an incredibly challenging situation and turn it into something really positive for other people. So Dan, thank you for taking the time and sharing personally with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Heart to Heart. And if you would like more information about any of the ICOS resources or opportunities, go to ic-os.org. That's ic-os.org for more information.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.